Good morning and welcome to Morning Brew on the Orion Talk Radio Network in 1650 AM, Tonawanda, New York. I am your host, Gwen Caldwell. I apologize. Almost laughable, the things that happen. Synchronicity, isn't it a strange thing? Okay, I'm going to bring Caleb on. And we'll get on with our show. So stand by.
Hey, how you doing?
Good morning, Caleb. Okay, we're up and running now. Okay, we've got a break coming up here in about 6 minutes. But, Caleb, if you could just just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the One People's Public Trust.
How far back in time do you want me to go? Old narrative?
Yeah, just an overview. The Reader's Digest version.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, I was homeschooled all the way through high school. So I came from a very conservative family. My father was very much a libertarian, and we were homeschooled. So my dad was a really sharp computer guy. My mom was a zoologist, and she stopped being a zoologist to hang out and be a homemaker and spend time with kids, so on and so forth. So we were always really encouraged to be inquisitive and to be very curious. And so when I was growing up, we lived in a small farming community. And so when I was 15 or 16, my brother and I started going to these meetings, and it was, a bunch of older guys sitting around watching videos of this guy, that were probably shot in the 70s. He was talking about how to, deal with the court system and traffic tickets and so on and so forth. And to back up a little bit, when I was born, I didn't get a Social Security number because my dad said no. We don't need this sheet of paper. We don't need your number. So anyway, I was hanging out on the farm, being a farm boy, trying to be a cowboy. I wanted to be a cowboy before NAFTA passed. I thought life was extremely romantic. And so I had my little spread, had my 9 head.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a good time. Anyway, NAFTA passed, and the price of 800-pound feeders dropped from like 80, 85 cents a pound to like 40 or something ridiculous. So anyway, so much for being a cowboy. But I was exposed to this whole idea, growing up, and obviously I read a lot. I was really fascinated by warfare and strategy. And Alexander the Great and Napoleon and Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar, and I was really fascinated by battlefield strategy. And so as I read about how these generals, moved their armies about and made decisions on attacking and so on and so forth, in World War I, World War II, all these things. Let me get rid of a phone call here. Hang on. I just began to become very sort of enraptured with the idea that we're free. And you go back and you look at what the nobles did at the Magna Carta, and you look at what the founding fathers did with the Declaration of Independence. And all through time, you see this reoccurring theme that the responsibility of your existence belongs to you, and no one can take value from you without your permission. And if someone does take value from you without your permission, it's because you were unwilling to stand up to them. And standing up to them may cost you your life, as we see with the various peasant revolts in Europe, right after, say, the Black Plague and some of the nonsense that occurred with the Catholic Church. And just so everyone's clear, I don't hate the Catholic Church. They're just like any other organization that's been, unfortunately, incredibly corrupted. But, there was a lot of hospitals in this country that have a Catholic name, and I'm thankful for all the people that participated inside the Catholic Church. Even unbeknownst to them, they were involved in a corrupt organization. The body of work that they were doing, I believe that they they thought that they were laboring for the good, and so I'm thankful for that. So I'm thankful that, you know, there were Catholic priests that decided to set up schools and educate people in 1600s. So that being aside, I studied history basically, and as I studied history, I said, this is really interesting, and I sort of put it away. My mom always talked about when I was growing up that, you know, education is like one of those boards that painters put paint on.
Right.
and the more knowledge you have is like the more colors you can pick from to paint. And if you choose not to have a lot of knowledge, you may only be able to paint a picture with just black paint. But if you are well versed and have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge to draw off of, you can do a lot more. She called it, you know, her bag of tricks or whatever. So anyway, basically the homeschooling process that my parents imparted on me was all about learning how to learn and about being very curious. I've just always been very curious. So we have the event on the farm where I grew up, and we had that sort of construct take place. And, you know, when I was 16, I borrowed a bunch of money from my grandpa, and that's where my 9 cows came from. And so I was involved in, like, entrepreneurship.
Early on.
From an early on age. So, you know, I'd made more money working at the local Dairy Queen than running my 9 head around. But, you know, the experience that I got from doing it and trying to exchange my labor for value was very important at that point in time in my growth. So anyway, eventually, like we all did, I had to leave the home. I went to college and studied music because I wanted to play jazz. And in our home, all of us had to start playing the little family spinning organ when we were 9. And so jazz was very appealing to me. It's a beautiful form. So off to college I went. And
Caleb,
yep.
could you just hold that thought? We're coming up on a break, and we'll pick this up right after the break. This is Morning Brew on the Orion Talk Radio Network in 1650. Welcome back to Morning Brew on the Orion Talk Radio Network in 1650 AM, Tonawanda, New York. I want to thank everyone for being patient with us and having the network come back online. So today, my guest is Caleb Skinner, trustee for the One People's Public Trust. And when we went to break, Caleb, you were talking about going to school and studying music. So if you want to kind of just pick up right there.
Yeah, so when I went to college, I didn't have a Social Security number. And I couldn't fit in their system unless I had a Social Security number. So I didn't really realize what I was doing at the time, so I went and got one. So then I studied music for a couple of years, and then went down that path until my music profs told me I should get a teaching degree. So I naturally went to figure out how much a teacher made and laughed, because I started programming when I was 9. So I became aware of technology at a very young age. And while I didn't become like a monster in high school, I was aware of it. So in college, I thought, well, I just want to play jazz, so I'll drop out of college and go get into the high-tech sector. So that's exactly what I did. So I did that, and then I actually was doing some work for a company when Y2K happened. So we were sitting around this, you know, center waiting for the world to end, and we all knew it wouldn't. It was just all a big bunch of baloney. But what sort of triggered me was the tax bill I got for my triple time. And I thought to myself, how are all men created equal? Why is it that I have to pay this enormous penalty on my labor because I got paid triple time? Why aren't my streets paved in gold? Why do I ever hit a pothole? What on earth is going on?
Right.
So that event caused me to remember all the stuff I studied when I was younger, and it made me very sort of inquisitive. What is going on here? Why are we paying this much money in taxes? Why did Ronald Reagan, when he was president in 81, release the Grace Commission that basically said all the money you pay to the government goes to service the debt? And that was back in 81. Where's all this money going? What is going on? What's going on with my country? You know, and my grandpa fought in World War II, and I was very, you know, patriotic, if you will, and all this. And so this led me down this enormous rabbit hole of study and research. And my research shifted from, you know, studying wars and military strategy And then I began to study, why do wars ever get fought in the first place?
For bankers.
Exactly. And so then I began to realize, okay.
For buying of the bankers at the expense of innocent soldiers thinking they're fighting for freedom.
Right. I tried to go back through history and find a single war that was actually fought over real freedom. I couldn't find one. All I found was kings that were mad that their brother took the throne. I found popes that were upset that the local knights were out beating on each other, and so they sent them down to Israel to pick on our brothers, our Arab friends down there. I found bankers that were funding both sides of conflicts so that they could pocket the difference. I just found, every time I turned around, I found money and I found power, and I didn't find, oh, you're intruding on my freedom, back out of my yard. I found, I want what you have, and instead of getting to that position in an honorable fashion, I'll play the lowest common denominator card, or I'll just basically play a propaganda game, and we'll start a battle here, and we'll convince everyone that they have some sort of need to go to war. Like, you have to, I'm the Lord, so you have to take your plow and you have to beat it into a sword, and you have to come to war with me. Well, why? Well, because my honor's been violated. Well, why? Because this guy slept with my wife. Well, why? So I have to go die over that? I mean, this is silliness, you know. So I just, it didn't make any sense to me. And then I started looking around our current society, and I couldn't figure out why. You go to any big American or European city, or even some in Southeast Asia, and you look up, and all the skyscrapers have bank names at the top. All of them do.
Right.
Except maybe in like Seattle, where you have the Microsoft building, and maybe some in the Silicon Valley. But anywhere else in the world you go, why is it that bank buildings always have their names at the top of these towers? And how is it that a bank that, you know, gives you 1 or 2% on interest and, you know, supposedly turns around and leases your money out, even though they're not supposed to. Banks aren't, in America anyway, supposed to lend out their their depositors' money. They're only supposed to lend out their shareholders. But let's say that they do. How are they lending my money out at 5%, giving me 2%, taking 3%, and building skyscrapers?
Right.
Didn't make any sense. Like, I'm not dumb. The numbers don't line up. They don't add up. What's going on here? So that led me down this path of monetization and fractionalization. And then I began to realize none of this is a secret at all.
No, they do it right in your face.
They do it right in your face.
And they don't care.
And they don't care. And it's not so much that they don't care. Like, the way that I look at it, I always say the machine is really beautiful. It's magnificent. When you stand back and look at the creation that is here right now, from purely the perspective of architecture, like, I write software, so systems and frameworks are like incredibly intriguing to me. Like, this thing that we're moving away from is magnificent. The way that they've set this up and people just walk into these traps, to me, is fascinating. Like, and I was one of them. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe how clever this is. You have this loyalty to country, loyalty to state, loyalty to God, loyalty to church, loyalty to family, loyalty to whatever. And you never stop and look at who is really orchestrating the construct. You know, who is setting the things in motion. You just say, well, by God, my grandpa fought in Italy in World War II. So I'm going to go over here and shoot at this person because they attacked New York. Because that's what my grandfather did. And I'm not trying to diminish my grandfather. He was amazing. Purple Heart, had 3 medals. I mean, he's truly amazing. But, you know, World War II was fought over money. It was, you know, we don't want the banks in Europe to fail, so we have to go in on their side. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So as I began to see all this, I began to see, well, okay, where's the root of all of this? Is it truly that we are enslaved, or is it that we are creating the system ourselves? And then I realized that, like everything, it starts with us.
Our participation has allowed for this to go on for over a century.
God, no, it's a lot longer than that. It goes clear back to the start of the Catholic Church, and it goes clear back to Roman times. I mean, it's like the senators of Rome were hanging out one day, and they had just had a slave revolt, but they were worried about one. And so one of the senators got up in the forum and said, "Hey, we need to have all the citizens wear blue bands and all the slaves wear red bands, so we know who's who." And another senator got up and said, "Hey, stupid man, if we do that, the slaves will know there's 10 of them to every one of us."
Yeah, exactly.
We'll never be able to control the slaves. And so it began to really become very apparent to me that what we're dealing with here is the machine is magnificent, but it's only magnificent because we refuse to stand up and say, "I'm not going to play your game anymore."
So, Caleb.
And as soon as we,
Well, what I want to ask you, just because we're kind of limited on time today, and I'd be happy to have you back on the show, but to get more into this. But so how did you learn or connect with the other trustees or learn about the UCC and how that could be used as an instrument to eliminate their control over the being, the living being, person?
Well, I have a really good friend of mine who's an incredible networker, and he was introduced to Heather through a number of his connections. There's some people that are just really good at people, so that's how I ran into Heather. And we got into UCC because it became very apparent to us that everything is commercial. Everything is commerce.
Yep.
And once it became obvious that, all crime is commercial and everything is commercial, it's all driven by commerce.
And that's not just in the United States. That's globally.
Right. It's everywhere. That's absolutely everywhere. And it's not just everywhere today. Go back in time and read ancient law. Your bull gets out and gores my servant. You owe me money. The boar gets out, it's all commerce. It's always been commerce. We've always reduced everything back to an ounce of gold or plowing a field. I mean, it's just the way it works. It's not necessarily right, but, it is what it is. So when we kind of got to that space, it became very obvious that really what has to happen is you have to, it's like the founding fathers telling King George, all men are created equal. They sent him a nice letter and informed him in his language that all men are created equal.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to break, and we'll continue this discussion when we come back. This is Morning Brew on the Orion Talk Radio Network. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit. I know that we're kind of jumping a bit, but so you connected with Heather and you were looking at the UCC stuff. So now you've become a trustee. Mm-hmm. And of this One People's Public Trust. So what is your duty or obligation in that capacity to the people, to the trust? What is your role? How would you describe that?
Well, it's an interesting question. I would describe the role. So essentially the trust is anytime two people get together and express themselves, you can have an express trust. The idea of the trust is when the founding fathers expressed themselves, the trust was created. And then those trustees eventually died. And when a trust never really dissolves on its own. When the trustees die, it just goes dormant, but it's still there. So the role of the trust, as I see it, is to interface between the people and the government. And right now we have no government. We have corporation.
Exactly.
And as far as I'm concerned, I believe that what the trustee needed to do occurred, and it no longer is relevant. I really believe that. It doesn't need to be relevant. We don't need to be governed. I don't want to govern anyone, nor do I want anyone governing me. So the whole thing that we did was just to claim title to people's labor. It's the same thing that the Lords did with the King at the Magna Carta. It's the same thing that the founding fathers did with King George. We used a vehicle that they could understand, and we put it in their language. And we said, hey, what do you think about this? Please refute us. If you have if you really have labor, if you really have right to my labor, please come forth with the contract. Please come forth with your position. And they didn't. I don't believe that we need a government. I don't need anyone telling me what to do. I don't need to tell anyone else what to do. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't know why we can't just ban the whole thing and go back to living as honorable men and women. Like, I don't understand why that's a problem. I don't understand why we just don't pay for the things that we consume, and why don't we embrace the chaos of a free market and free technology, because you can't have one without the other. And when we do that, society will make tremendous leaps forward. But in order to do that, we have to stop telling our brothers how to live. And that's the business of government. I'm going to tell you how to behave. Well, why do you get to tell me how to behave? Why is that your affair? Why do you get to take my labor and give it to someone else? Why is that honorable? I mean, right. Charity is charity if it's forced.
So what happens in the real world, day to day? What has changed for the people in filing these UCC documents? What does that give the people now that they didn't have?
That's a good question. It doesn't give them anything they didn't already have, because the people already had their labor. Just like the king was never appointed by God. He was always appointed by the nobles. And all men have always been created equal. It wasn't that the founding fathers uncovered some new truth. It's always been that way, but it was never expressed. And so what the trustees did, and I believe they could have done it in any capacity, it just needed one people, one flesh and blood creation on this whole world needed to stand up and say, who are you? And where is my permission for you to use my labor?
Well, see, and I think that's what people don't understand. They control us by our own consent, either wittingly or unwittingly, mostly unwittingly and under fraudulent terms, because that's what they do. But and because we aren't educated in our public school system to know the difference, And so we get sucked into these unwitting contracts under the UCC. So what, in my mind's eye, I have this idea of as a people, as beings, what we should be doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm just real curious for you to share your thoughts on that, because I think people have become so sucked in to this paradigm that they think that this trust is their ticket out, when they had the ticket all along. All they had to do was take it out of their pocket and use it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we didn't see the Renaissance till the peasants stood up after the Black Plague and told the lords that they were going to get paid to work the land. And so if people want to see, and the Renaissance is an extremely fascinating thing to me, because if we look back at history, you see an explosion of knowledge and the Renaissance that followed. Those things were linked hand in hand. So you had like the printing press, and suddenly information's moving around, and all of a sudden you have these amazing things occurring that you have this exponential growth that didn't occur before. So now we have this incredible technology called the internet, but we have yet to see the Renaissance follow from this explosion of knowledge, which is fascinating to me. Like, I'm sitting here just scratching my head saying, when is the Renaissance going to hit? And the reason it hasn't happened yet is because we as a people, all of us, we have to stop waiting for someone else. Like, there's this notion that someone is going to show up riding a white horse with their hair flowing in the wind and rescue people. And it ain't going to happen. Because this is about the people standing up at an individual level and saying no. And so Heather is always constantly talking about doing and being and being and doing and doing and being. And the reality of it is, that's what we have to do. Like, the Wright brothers are a fascinating study. These are a couple of dumb kids from wherever they were from, one of the Carolinas, that learned how to fly. And they didn't have fancy educations, and they didn't have families with deep pockets backing them, and they didn't have countries writing them checks. Go study that block of time and look at how come they were successful. And go look at how rubber was invented. Some guy dropped some stuff on top of a stove because he was messing around in his garage, and he invents rubber. Albert Einstein comes up with a theory of relativity because he's riding through a square and looks up at a stop clock or a clock tower and is struck by this awesome inspiration. When we as people stop looking to the thing that currently is government, and the city council and the school board and this and that and the other, and start to look within and say, what can I do today to make my society better? Then it changes.
Well, you and I talked about that. You know, I don't see people living in gratitude. I don't see people viewing themselves as being abundant. We live in this deprivation mentality. We don't see people being in service in their own community. Everything is about self and my house, my car, my world, my kids, my family, and we've stopped interacting as a community on a really deep, imperative level, and that's one of the beauties that I see of the opportunity with opt-in is to expand ourselves to that point where we feel that necessity to interact as a community again and to be in service and to assist in our community and to be in that place of gratitude and abundance, because all of that comes back in like kind.
So let me
give circle.
Right. Let me give you an example because I know we're running out of time here. I'm in software. So software has become this crazy monster, okay, where it now controls our lives because there's no limits on software. We never come up with a protocol and said, as a software developer, this is how I'm going to conduct my affairs. So if you go back and look at Isaac Asimov and the 3 rules of robotics, Isaac Asimov, in his little genius mind back in the 40s or 50s or 60s, whenever he wrote that book, it's sitting on my bookshelf, comes up with these 3 rules of robotics, which is, hey, this is how robots need to interact with our human society. So that really resonated with me. So I ran off and came up with this thing that I call the VEX protocol, which stands for Virtual Extension of Self. So inside the VEX protocol, there's a series of rules that govern how software behaves. Okay? I'm not waiting around for some regulatory committee to come up and say, this is how this needs to work, or this is how this should happen, or this or that or the other. I'm just doing it. I know in your audience right now, there's 10 people that can each come up with their own protocol of how we should interact with our employees or our people that work for us, subcontractors, whatever called. How we should interact with the land. How we should interact with the animals. Look at the Native Americans, and every time, you know, I stated their history, they would kill an animal and they would thank the Great Spirit for it, and they would offer some sort of like thankfulness to that animal for it dying for them, right? They had their own, like, thankfulness and gratitude. We just need to start putting these things in place and saying, and then aligning with them. Hey, I'm an honorable person. This is how I conduct my affairs. And society will change. You just have to stop giving all of your energy to that machine, to that magnificent, glorious machine that they've created. And as soon as you walk away from it, you're the linchpin. It falls apart. And it is falling apart. It already has fallen apart. I mean, it's amazing to watch. Caleb,
thank you for being my guest today. We'll have to do this again because we did get cut short today.
And, you know, Alexander the Great and Napoleon and Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar. And I was really fascinated by battlefield strategy. And so as I read about how these generals, you know, moved their armies about and made decisions on attacking and so on and so forth. In World War I, World War II, all these things. Let me get rid of a phone call here. Hang on. I just began to become very sort of enraptured with the idea that we're free. And you go back and you look at what the nobles did at the Magna Carta, and you look at what the founding fathers did. A sheet of paper. We don't need your number. So anyway, I was hanging out on the farm, being a farm boy, trying to be a cowboy. I wanted to be a cowboy before NAFTA passed. I thought that life was extremely romantic. And so I had my little spread, had my 9 head.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a good time. Anyway, NAFTA passed, and the price of 800-pound feeders dropped from like 80, 85 cents a pound to like 40 or something ridiculous. So anyway, so much for being a cowboy. But anyway, I was exposed to this whole idea, you know, growing up, and obviously I read a lot. I was really fascinated by warfare and strategy.
Caleb, if you could just kind of just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the When People's Public Trust?
How far back in time do you want me to go? Whole narrative?
Yeah, just an overview. The Reader's Digest version.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, I was homeschooled all the way through high school. So I came from a very conservative family. My father was very much a libertarian, and we were homeschooled. So my dad was a really sharp computer guy. My mom was a zoologist, and she stopped being a zoologist to hang out and be a homemaker and spend time with kids, so on and so forth. So we were always really encouraged to be inquisitive and to be very curious. And so when I was growing up, we lived in a small farming community. And so when I was 15 or 16, my brother and I started going to these meetings. And it was, a bunch of older guys sitting around watching videos of this guy, that were probably shot in his 70s. He was talking about how to, deal with the court system and traffic tickets and so on and so forth. And to back up a little bit, when I was born, I didn't get a social security number because my dad said, no, we don't need this.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Brew on the Orion Talk Radio Network in 1650 AM, Tonawanda, New York. I am your host, Gwen Caldwell. I apologize. Almost laughable, the things that happen. Synchronicity, isn't it a strange thing? Okay, I'm going to bring Caleb on, and we'll get on with our show. So stand by.
Hey, how you doing?
Good morning, Caleb. Okay, we're up and running now. Okay, we've got a break coming up here in about 6 minutes, but